Ever wonder where the horror stories of global climate change come from? In this video, boys and girls, we'll see why the boogeyman is real and not just some make-believe story your friends tell to scare you. This video is titled Scare Tactics and is part of the expansion pack accompanying the main video, How It All Ends. When I first posted a version of the climate change decision grid in the spring of 2007, a lot of complaints I heard were along the lines that I had biased the grid by underplaying the negative consequences in the upper left box and overplaying the negative consequences in the lower right box. In the video How It All Ends Risk Management, I justified the consequences placed in the upper left box. Here we'll take a closer look at the lower right box. As you'll recall, that's the feasible worst-case scenario where we didn't take action, but human-caused global climate change turned out to be true after all. I was accused a lot of scaremongering, which really got me to thinking, is that always a bad thing? Can you imagine a scenario where maybe you're not scared enough for your own good? I'm a science teacher, so I'm in a bit of a position of being able to understand where the pronouncements of impending doom come from. Now, most in the scientific world are very careful not to pronounce impending doom, not just because they don't want to be accused of scaremongering, but because scientists have a trained hesitancy about being too confident. So the perception of doomsaying usually is created by the media's reporting on what the scientists actually say. As you'll recall from the video How It All Ends, The Nature of Science, all science is explicitly uncertain, but that uncertainty is often dropped from the story when the media gets a hold of it. This is where the public has gotten its perception of, well, why should we listen to the scientists this time when they're always predicting doom and it never comes? It's because when the scientist says, I found an interesting preliminary result, it may be possible that average global temperatures might be falling. This merits further study. The media, which is all about telling stories, runs with that and proclaims, scientists warn of impending ice age, glaciers may cover Florida. Which is why you personally are at a huge advantage, having seen parts of the statements from AAAS and NAS that I shared in the video Risk Management, because you've had the opportunity to bypass the media and see for yourself what the scientists are saying. And after viewing Nature of Science, you now have a better appreciation of how tentative science really is. So now you can grasp how really remarkable those statements from AAAS and NAS are in their boldness. Science, by its very nature, is tentative, yet the two organizations that pretty much are the science establishment felt compelled to announce to the world, the globe is warming, we're the ones doing it, it's going to be bad, and we should do something about it quick. If you feel a little nervous because those normally sober fuddy-duddies seem decidedly alarmed, that's probably a healthy reaction. Now, I should make this clear. The nasty details of catastrophic climate change I described in previous videos and that I'll give more details of here are the worst case scenarios. So we don't think at this point that they are likely to happen. But as time goes on and our understanding gets better, they appear to be increasingly feasible. I was struck by the statement from Eric Renaud, a NASA scientist who has measured a doubling in ice loss from Greenland over the past decade. He said, we see things today that 5 years ago would have seemed completely impossible, extravagant, exaggerated. And Martin Perry, co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, told reporters just recently, we are all used to talking about these impacts coming in the lifetimes of our children and grandchildren. Now we know that it's us. Now remember, as professional individuals, they're near the bottom of the credibility spectrum that we described in the video Risk Management, down here. But still, the sentiments give you pause. Just today, a student said to me, I'm tired of the predictions painting a worse and worse picture. I just want them to come out and say, oh, we were wrong, everything's going to be fine. I told him that he can get just such a pleasant bedtime story. Just go to the websites of the conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Hoover Institute. Cato actually published the book Climate of Fear, Why We Shouldn't Worry About Global Warming. And CEI ran TV ads just last year with the tagline, carbon dioxide. They call it pollution, we call it life. But then, of course, he'd be obliged to compare them on the credibility spectrum, down here, with AAAS, NAS, and USCAP, and Exxon, up here. And then he'd probably get depressed again. But despair not, we can do something about this, which is what the video How It All Ends, The Solution is about. So be sure to not click away until you've seen that one. In the meantime, let's employ some scare tactics and take a look at where the boogeyman stories come from, to get a sense of whether raising the alarm about abrupt climate change is closer to the story of Chicken Little or of Paul Revere. Because you gotta admit, they were both alarmists. In the video Risk Management, I detailed how AAAS, NAS, and USCAP, as well as the National Science Academies of most of the rest of the world, have publicly called for action on climate change. But I didn't mention another stunning warning about climate change from another source high up on our credibility spectrum. It's a 2003 Pentagon study titled An Abrupt Climate Change Scenario and Its Implications for United States National Security, Imagining the Unthinkable. Commissioned by the Pentagon's most respected big thinker, co-written by a former Shell oil analyst, and reported on by Fortune magazine, it's hardly the Sierra Club newsletter. You should definitely check it out for yourself. It's an accessible yet terrifying read, full of war and chaos, as our military planners sketched out a worst-case but plausible scenario. As famine, disease, and weather-related disasters strike due to abrupt climate change, many countries' needs will exceed their carrying capacity. This will create a sense of desperation, which is likely to lead to offensive aggression in order to reclaim balance. It cautions that while the scenario it explores is not likely, it is quite plausible that within a decade the evidence of an imminent abrupt climate shift may become clear and reliable. The report explores how such an abrupt climate change scenario could potentially destabilize the geopolitical environment, leading to skirmishes, battles, and even war due to resource constraints. Disruption and conflict will be endemic features of life. Ew, that last line is icky in so many ways. Recent research suggests that there is a possibility that this currently observed gradual global warming could lead to a relatively abrupt slowing of the ocean's thermohaline conveyor, which could lead to harsher winter weather conditions, sharply reduced soil moisture, and more intense winds in certain regions that currently provide a significant fraction of the world's food production. With inadequate preparation, the result could be a significant drop in the human carrying capacity of the Earth's environment. Did you catch that last line? You may have nodded off for a second because these guys are even more verbose than I am, but that was essentially government speak for, "We're all gonna die!" Not quite, but roll the phrase, "significant drop in the human carrying capacity of the Earth's environment," around in your head a few times and see how warm and fuzzy it makes you feel. The report's bottom line warning to the nation's military planners is, because of the potentially dire consequences, the risk of abrupt climate change, although uncertain and quite possibly small, should be elevated beyond a scientific debate to a U.S. national security concern. If you go and read this report about a national security concern, you might be interested to notice that the only mention it makes of terrorism is as a consequence of abrupt climate change. Pretty scary stuff. It makes a little more sense now when the author Fred Pierce relates his experience in researching his book, With Speed and Violence, Why Scientists Fear Tipping Points in Climate Change. Remember, on our credibility spectrum, as a professional individual, he falls near the bottom, and so we won't take his personal analysis about the climate at face value. However, we certainly have no reason to question his personal experience. In the introduction, he writes, "Some environmental stories don't add up. I'm an environmental journalist, and sometimes the harder you look at a new scare story, the less scary it looks. The science is flaky, or someone has recklessly extrapolated from a small local event to create a global catastrophe. But climate change is different. I have been on this beat for 18 years now. The more I learn, the more I go and see for myself, and the more I question scientists, the more scared I get. Don't take my word for it. Often in environmental science, it is the young, idealistic researchers who become the impassioned advocates. Here, I find it is the people who have been in the field the longest, the researchers with the best reputations for doing good science, and the professors with the best CVs and longest lists of published papers, who are the most fearful, often talking in the most dramatic language." So let's take a look at some of the specific mechanics that have got top brass and top scientists both so nervous. The details of all of these worst-case scenarios are very complex, which is why in both the videos, Risk Management and The Nature of Science, I've suggested leaving the interpretation of the evidence to the experts, and we stick to performing our supervisory duties by taking what the scientists say and deciding the course of action that seems to have the best expected value. But now that you've watched How It All Ends, Mechanics of Climate Change, you are in a position of understanding a bit where some of the more outlandish-sounding predictions come from, so we'll explore those here. I think you'll be disappointed to find that they are far more reasonable than you would hope, because the picture ain't pretty. As always, you shouldn't take what I say at face value. Do some research for yourself and remember to evaluate your sources.